billionaire arrived home earlier than expected, and saw what his wife had done to his black adoptive mother. The electric Mercedes glided silently through the circular driveway of the Malibu mansion when David Thompson decided to cancel his last-minute meeting and surprise his family. 3 weeks traveling around Japan closing the biggest acquisition in the history of his tech company deserved a celebration at home. At 41, the CEO of Thompson Tech had turned a Silicon Valley startup into an $8 billion empire. But as he turned off the engine, his mind wasn't on record numbers. It was on the 67-year-old woman who had saved him when he was just 9 years old. Ruth Williams wasn't his biological mother, but she had been the only mother who really mattered. When the adoption system placed him in her small home on the south side of Chicago, she was a retired nurse living on her modest pension. Even so, she worked extra shifts at 2 hospitals to pay for his programming classes. David put away the keys and walked toward the side entrance that led directly to the gourmet kitchen. He planned to surprise Ruth by making her favorite tea, Earl Grey with honey, just as she had taught him years ago when he would come home from school upset after facing mean comments about his family situation. The sound of tense voices made him stop abruptly behind the Italian marble column. "I've told you not to use the front entrance when I have guests." His wife Isabella's voice cut through the air like a razor. "What kind of impression do you think this gives my clients' wives?" "I'm sorry, Mrs. Isabella. I just wanted to." Ruth's voice was a broken whisper, the perfect English David knew now laden with fear. "I don't care what you wanted. You're the maid here, not the queen of the house just because my husband has this strange obsession with you." David felt the blood freeze in his veins. Maid? Ruth had moved into the guest wing a year ago, after he insisted she deserved to live in comfort after decades of sacrifice. Isabella had always shown such affection for dear Ruth, at least when he was around. "I'm not a maid," Ruth murmured with a dignity that made David's heart ache. "David invited me to live here as family." Isabella's cruel laughter echoed through the kitchen. "Family? A black woman from Chicago who picked him up from an institution when no one else wanted him? Please. You were paid by the state to take care of him, just like any nanny." The Italian leather briefcase slipped from David's numb fingers, landing silently on the Persian rug. For 32 years, Ruth had never mentioned receiving any assistance from the state. To him, she had always been simply the woman who chose to love him when the whole world seemed to have given up on him. "And another thing," Isabella continued, "stop leaving your hair in the drain of the bathroom you use. It's disgusting. Starting today, you'll use the bathroom in the basement storage room. But the basement bathroom doesn't have heating. Then use cold water. It might be good for you to learn that you're not a guest here, you're tolerated." David cautiously approached the kitchen entrance and saw Ruth, the woman who had worked 16 hours a day to pay for his guitar and computer lessons, huddled against the granite island like a wounded bird. Her hands, the same ones that had comforted him during endless nights of nightmares about abandonment, trembled as she held a cup of now-cold tea. "Isabella is right," Ruth whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I should have stayed in Chicago. This isn't my place." "Exactly." Isabella slammed her hand on the counter. Finally, a moment of lucidity. "You never belonged in this world, Ruth. You can pretend all you want, but you'll always be a retired nurse from a poor neighborhood trying to pass herself off as something she's not." It was then that David noticed the detail that completely devastated him. Ruth was wearing a simple cleaning uniform. Isabella had literally turned the woman who raised a billionaire into a maid. As he quietly retreated to the garden, a memory came flooding back with devastating force. Ruth at 35, working 3 jobs to pay for his first programming competition, saying, "Baby, one day you're going to be so big that you'll help people like us. But never, ever let anyone make you forget where you came from." Now, at 67, the woman who had sacrificed her best years so that he could dream was being humiliated in the house that her sacrifices had made possible. David took out his cell phone and opened the mansion's security app. If Isabella was doing this now, in front of him, what happened when he was away for weeks? If this story of betrayal and racism touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because you'll find out how a man who owed everything to his adoptive mother turned her humiliation into the greatest lesson in justice a prejudiced woman ever received. For 3 hours, David remained locked in his office reviewing weeks of security footage. Each video revealed a new layer of systematic cruelty that made him nauseous. Isabella forcing Ruth to eat cold leftovers in the basement, while she dined on gourmet dishes in the main dining room. Isabella hiding the remote control for the heater when David was traveling, leaving Ruth shivering in the cold during California's winter nights. Isabella throwing away letters that arrived for Ruth from old colleagues in Chicago, even intercepting medical correspondence. But it was the video from 2 weeks ago that completely destroyed him. Ruth had prepared a special dinner to celebrate the 32nd anniversary of her adoption, waiting for David to return from a conference in New York. Isabella came home, saw the table set with candles and the homemade cake Ruth had baked with her own arthritic hands. "How pathetic," Isabella said directly to the camera, as if she knew David would be watching. "An old black woman pretending to be the mother of a white billionaire. That's delusional even for you, Ruth." Isabella threw the whole cake in the trash, blew out the candles, and forced Ruth to clean everything up before David arrived. When he called from his trip to ask if Ruth had enjoyed the surprise he had asked Isabella to organize, flowers and a special dinner, his wife lied with frightening ease. "Oh, she loved it, honey. She was so moved she cried. You should have seen it. She said you're the best son a mother could have." Ruth had cried. David could see it in the recordings. But not out of joy. Out of humiliation and loneliness, eating a cold sandwich in the basement while Isabella posted photos of the family dinner on social media, using old images to maintain the charade. The investigation revealed something even more sinister. David discovered that Isabella had a private WhatsApp group called Malibu Elite Wives, where she shared updates about Ruth with her equally privileged and racist friends. "David's old maid is getting more and more confused," Isabella wrote. "Yesterday, I found her trying to use the master bathroom again. I had to remind her where she belongs. These people never learn boundaries." Her friends' responses were equally venomous. "At least you have patience, dear. I would have sent her back to the ghetto where she belongs." Jennifer Walsh, wife of the CEO of Walsh Industries. "David needs to understand that charity has its limits. It's one thing to help these people, it's another to turn your home into a shelter." Patricia Sterling, heiress to a real estate fortune. But it was Isabella's response that made David's blood run cold. "Don't worry, girls. I'm documenting all of her episodes. Once I have enough evidence of dementia and incapacity, I'll convince David that she needs professional care in an institution. Problem solved permanently." David closed his laptop, his hands shaking. Isabella wasn't just abusing Ruth. She was orchestrating a campaign to remove her from their lives permanently. That night, he pretended to be asleep when Isabella came home from the spa. Through half-closed eyelashes, he watched his wife check messages on her phone, smiling with satisfaction as she read updates from her hate group. "David," she whispered, nudging him gently. "I need to talk to you about Ruth tomorrow. Some troubling things have happened while you were away." He mumbled something incoherent, pretending to be sleepy, while Isabella prepared for another Oscar-worthy performance as the concerned wife. The next day, during breakfast prepared by Ruth, which Isabella only allowed when David was present, the charade began. "Honey, I don't want to worry you, but your mother has been having some episodes lately." Isabella gently touched David's arm, her voice laden with feigned concern. "Yesterday I found her trying to cook at 3 in the morning, completely confused about what day it was." Ruth stopped serving coffee, her eyes filling with panic. David could see that she wanted to defend herself, but she had learned through months of abuse that any protest would only make her situation worse. "She's also been leaving the bathroom running and forgetting to close doors," Isabella continued, each lie delivered with rehearsed conviction. "I'm worried she might hurt herself. Maybe it's time we sought some professional help." David watched Ruth cringe with every word, the dignity she had maintained through decades of adversity being systematically shattered by the woman he had trusted to protect her. It was then that a specific memory came back with full force. David at age 12, coming home from school with a cut lip after a fight with boys who called him an orphan bastard. Ruth sat him down in the kitchen of their small Chicago home, cleaned his wounds, and said something he never forgot. "Baby, some people will try to make you feel small because they themselves feel small inside. But you need to remember, you carry within you the strength of all the ancestors who fought so you could be here. And one day when you're big and strong, you'll protect other people like I protect you now." Ruth had kept her promise. She worked 3 jobs to pay for his programming classes. She sold her own jewelry to buy his first computer. She stayed up all night helping him with school projects after double shifts at the hospital. Now it was time for David to keep his. "Interesting," David said calmly, taking a sip of coffee. And where exactly would you recommend she get this professional help? Isabella's eyes sparkled with a victory she believed was close at hand. Well, Sunny Acres is a very respected residence. They have experience with people in her situation. David knew Sunny Acres, an expensive institution that mainly catered to wealthy white families who wanted to get rid of inconvenient relatives with a clear conscience. You've already researched this, David noted, his voice still neutral. I just want what's best for her, Isabella lied, touching his arm again. And for us. We have our own lives to live. At that moment, David realized that his wife had completely underestimated two crucial factors. First, that the abandoned boy from Chicago had never really disappeared. He was just hibernating under a veneer of wealth. And second, that Ruth Williams had taught this boy something far more valuable than programming. She had taught him that true strength comes not from having money or power, but from knowing exactly when and how to use them to protect those you love. As Isabella continued to elaborate on her plans to get rid of Ruth for the good of everyone, David quietly opened the recording app on his phone. Because some conversations needed to be preserved for posterity. And some people needed to be reminded that underestimating a son protecting his mother could be the most costly mistake anyone ever makes in their life. What Isabella didn't know was that every cruel word, every calculated lie, and every moment of sadism was being meticulously documented by someone who had learned from childhood that patience is just another word for strategy, and that when the time came to act, nothing would remain of the perfect world she had built on the suffering of an innocent woman. For the next 3 days, David maintained the perfect facade of the husband busy with business while quietly orchestrating the most important investigation of his life. Each morning, he watched Isabella play the role of the concerned wife over breakfast, inventing new episodes of Ruth's confusion while the victim herself served coffee with trembling hands. Yesterday I found her trying to call someone at 4 in the morning, Isabella lied, delicately biting into her French toast. When I asked who she was calling, she said she wanted to talk to you, but you were there sleeping next to me. Clearly disoriented in time and space. David watched Ruth lower her eyes, knowing she had been trying to call a former colleague from Chicago who was in the hospital, information David had discovered in the recordings when Isabella deliberately hung up the phone and then lied, saying that no one had answered. Maybe we should speed up the process with Sunny Acres, Isabella continued, her voice laden with false urgency. They have a spot opening up next week. It would be perfect. It was then that David knew he had little time. Isabella wasn't just planning to get rid of Ruth, she was accelerating the timeline. That afternoon, while Isabella was at her weekly massage session at the spa, David drove downtown to meet someone his assistant had discreetly recommended. Marcus Rivera was a former LAPD detective who now worked as a private investigator specializing in domestic abuse and family fraud cases. Rivera's office occupied the 3rd floor of an inconspicuous building downtown, far from the social circles of Malibu where Isabella might recognize him. When David entered, he found a man in his 50s with graying hair and eyes that had seen it all. Mr. Thompson, Rivera stood up, extending his hand. Your assistant gave me a general idea of the situation, but I need to hear it directly from you. David opened his laptop and showed him the recordings from the last few months. Rivera watched silently, taking notes occasionally, his face hardening with each new piece of evidence of cruelty. This is systematic abuse, Rivera murmured after seeing Isabella force Ruth to sleep in the freezing basement. And this false documentation she's creating, it's preparation for involuntary commitment. I've seen it before. I need more than home videos, David said. I need something that will completely destroy her credibility before she can have my mother committed. Rivera leaned forward, connecting a device to David's laptop. Let's start with a complete forensic analysis of her cell phone and computer. If she's documenting lies about your mother, she's also leaving digital traces of her true intentions. The investigator explained that they would need physical access to Isabella's devices for at least 2 hours for a complete data extraction. David immediately thought of next Friday's charity dinner, where Isabella always left her cell phone on the charger all night. And there's something else, Rivera continued, showing printouts of the WhatsApp group messages. This Malibu elite wives group may be involved in other discriminatory activities. If we can get full access to the history, we may have enough material to expose a much larger pattern of prejudice among Malibu's elite. While driving back home, David received a call from his personal lawyer, James Walsh, ironically, the brother of Jennifer Walsh, who was a member of Isabella's racist group. David, my brother told me something troubling, James said without preamble. Apparently, Isabella is consulting with lawyers about guardianship proceedings. She is claiming that her mother has dementia and needs a legal guardian. David's blood ran cold. If Isabella obtained a guardianship order, she would have the legal power to institutionalize Ruth against her will and even cut off her contact with David. James, I need you to prepare a counterpetition immediately. And I want you to revoke any power of attorney Isabella may have over my mother's affairs. David, that may alert her that you're investigating. I don't care. I'm not going to let her legally kidnap my mother while I gather evidence. That evening, David found Ruth alone in the garden, watching the stars from a small wooden bench she had asked to have placed there, the only personal request she had made in a year of living together. Mom, he sat down beside her. I need to ask you a question, and I need you to be honest with me. Ruth turned to him with those eyes that had seen so many battles. Of course, baby. What do you want to know? Isabella, has she been treating you well when I'm not around? For a long moment, Ruth remained silent. David could see the internal struggle between protecting him from the painful truth and trusting him as the man she had raised to face injustice. She has her concerns, Ruth finally replied, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes I think it would be better if I went back to Chicago. Maybe I'm too old to adapt to a place like this. Mom, look at me. David held her hands. You've adapted to much more than that. You came from Taiwan, learned English, worked 3 jobs, raised me on your own, and made me the person I am today. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong wherever you choose to be. Tears glistened in Ruth's eyes. Sometimes I forget what a brave boy you were. Always defending others on the playground, always fighting injustice. I'm still that boy, Mom. And now it's my turn to defend you. As they drove home, David noticed Isabella watching from the second-floor window, her cell phone glued to her ear. She was clearly reporting something to someone, probably more evidence of Ruth's growing confusion. David smiled slightly. Let her continue to underestimate the situation. Every call, every message, every moment of calculated cruelty was being documented and analyzed. Isabella had built her hate campaign on the belief that David would never discover the truth. But she had made the most fatal mistake any antagonist can make. She had attacked the wrong person. Ruth Williams was not only David Thompson's mother, she had raised a strategist, a fighter, and someone who had learned from childhood that sometimes justice must be served with surgical precision. The next morning, Rivera sent the first preliminary analysis of the data. What they found was even worse than David had imagined. Isabella wasn't just abusing Ruth, she was coordinating with other wives of Malibu's elite to solve other inconvenient family problems. The WhatsApp group revealed conversations about how several of them had gotten rid of elderly or unwanted relatives using similar tactics. It was a systematic conspiracy of elder abuse disguised as family concern. David printed everything out and stored the evidence in a digital safe that even Isabella didn't know existed. Every cruel message, every humiliating photo, every calculated plan was now preserved forever. As he watched Isabella prepare yet another performance for breakfast, David remembered something Ruth had taught him when he was 12, after some boys at school had teased him for having a different mother. Baby, she had said, some people think strength means shouting louder or hitting harder. But true strength is silent. It grows, prepares, and waits for the right moment. And when that moment comes, it doesn't just win, it teaches a lesson that will never be forgotten. Isabella was about to discover that she had chosen the wrong target for her cruelty. And when the lesson came, it would be as complete and devastating as the years of humiliation she had imposed on the one person David would never allow to be hurt. What Isabella couldn't imagine was that every fake smile, every elaborate lie, and every moment of sadism wasn't just being recorded, it was building the foundation of her own destruction. Because when you underestimate a son defending his mother, you're not just making a tactical mistake, you're unleashing a force that can completely rewrite the rules of the game you thought you were dominating. The Friday of the charity dinner arrived as Isabella had planned. It would be her last performance before she could have Ruth committed permanently. As she got ready in her room, David finalized preparations for the biggest twist in her life. Rivera had pulled it all off. The complete forensic analysis of Isabella's cell phone revealed not only months of documented cruelty, but a conspiracy involving 6 other wives of Malibu's elite who systematically abused inconvenient, elderly family members. Mr. Thompson, Rivera called one last time. I'm in touch with journalists from the LA Times and TMZ. When you give the signal, This story will explode simultaneously on all platforms. David watched Isabella descend the stairs in her designer dress, radiant with the proximity of her victory. She didn't even notice that Ruth was no longer wearing her cleaning uniform. David had burned it all and replaced it with decent clothes. "Honey, the Sunny Acres van is coming to pick up your mother on Monday," Isabella said, touching up her lipstick. "I've already signed all the paperwork as her attorney. Problem solved forever." "Interesting," David pulled out his cell phone. "Because I just got a very enlightening call from Dr. Peterson at Sunny Acres." Isabella's smile faltered slightly. "What kind of call?" "He wanted to confirm that I had actually authorized you to forge my signature on the admission documents." David showed her the phone screen. "Apparently, falsifying medical documents is a federal crime." Isabella's face paled, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. It's also interesting how meticulously you documented my mother's episodes of dementia." David swiped his finger across the screen, showing screenshots of Isabella's fake notes. "Especially considering she passed all the cognitive tests I secretly arranged for her last week." "You spied on me?" Isabella's mask began to crack. "No. I protected my family from a sociopath." David opened the security camera app. "Ruth, please come here." Ruth appeared in the room, no longer hunched over in fear, but standing tall and dignified. Isabella watched her with growing horror. This was no longer the broken woman she had spent months destroying. "Ruth has something to say, Isabella. In fact, she has months of things to say." "David baby," Ruth began in a steady voice, "your wife forced me to sleep in the basement during the winter. She forced me to eat cold leftovers on the floor like an animal. She called me names I would never repeat." Isabella tried to protest, but David raised his hand. "Oh, but there's more. Much more." He connected his cell phone to the giant TV in the living room, where messages from the Malibu Elite Wives group began to appear. Every racist word, every cruel plan, every moment of sadism exposed in high definition. "David's old maid is getting more and more confused," David read aloud. "I had to remind her where she belongs." Isabella recoiled, pure panic replacing her confidence. "You can't, this is private." "You know what else is interesting?" David continued, relentless. "Jennifer Walsh, Patricia Sterling, all your friends. They don't know you saved these conversations. And tonight, at the charity dinner where you'll all be, this will be projected for the entire Malibu elite to see." "You wouldn't dare." "I already have." David showed a series of notifications on his phone. TMZ, LA Times, page 6. They all have the story. Malibu Elite Wives run elder abuse scheme. Including photos of you forcing my mother to wear a maid's uniform. Isabella collapsed into an armchair, reality finally hitting her. "My life, my reputation, you've destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything. You built your life on cruelty and lies. I just turned on the lights." Isabella's phone began ringing incessantly. First Jennifer Walsh, "Isabella, what the hell are those photos on TMZ?" Then Patricia Sterling, "You've gotten us into huge trouble." "And there's more," David continued, relentless. "My lawyer has already filed for divorce. You're going to leave this house with exactly what you brought when you arrived. Nothing. The prenuptial agreement you signed is very clear about infidelity and family abuse." "Prenup? You said we didn't need one." "I lied. Just like you lied about everything else." David leaned forward. "And you know what the best part is? All your fake documentation about my mother's dementia? It's perfect evidence of attempted medical fraud. The FBI is already interested." Isabella tried one last desperate gambit. "No one will believe you. I'm a respected woman, you're a billionaire man with security cameras, forensic evidence, and witnesses, versus a woman who has just been exposed nationally for abusing a 67-year-old woman." David smiled coldly. "Good luck with that defense." Her cell phone rang again. This time it was her own lawyer. "Isabella, I have to let you know that I can no longer represent you. Conflict of interest with other clients affected by this situation." "Your friends are all distancing themselves," David observed. "Apparently, Being exposed as a racist and an abuser isn't very good for one's social image. Isabella finally broke down completely. Please, David. We can work this out. I'll change. Ruth can stay. We'll go to therapy. Anything. The time to change was before you turned the woman who raised me into your personal victim. Ruth approached Isabella for the first time in months without fear. You don't have to change for me, ma'am. You just have to get out of my family's life. David watched his wife completely fall apart. The woman who had built her entire identity on social status and moral superiority was now a national pariah. But he felt no pleasure in her destruction, only the cold satisfaction of seeing justice served. There's a car waiting for you outside, David said calmly. Your bags are already inside. And Isabella? If you try any reprisals against my mother or me, remember, I have resources you can't even dream of, and now I know exactly what kind of person you really are. As Isabella left the mansion she had used as a stage for her cruelty for the last time, she still did not fully understand what David had orchestrated. Because the true extent of her downfall would only become clear when she discovered that losing her life of luxury was only the beginning, and that the consequences of underestimating a son protecting his mother would extend far beyond what her privileged mind could imagine. A year later, David watched Ruth teach basic programming to underprivileged children at the community center he had funded in her honor. At 68, she radiated a vitality that had been suppressed by months of abuse. Remember, kids, Ruth said in a firm voice, technology is a tool for justice. You can use it to build bridges where others build walls. Isabella, meanwhile, had become persona non grata throughout Los Angeles. Her former friends publicly shunned her after the national scandal. Living in a modest apartment on a divorce settlement limited by the prenuptial agreement, she discovered that privilege without character is only a temporary illusion. David had received a message from her the week before, I was a different person. Can we try again? He deleted it without replying. Some bridges, once burned by cruelty, should never be rebuilt. Do you know why we won? Ruth asked as they drove home. Because you remembered that true strength isn't about having power, it's about using it to protect those we love. David smiled, watching the woman who had turned an abandoned boy into a man of principle. Isabella had tried to destroy her, but only revealed that some people are indestructible, forged by decades of unconditional love and sacrifice. The best revenge was never to repay the damage done. It was to prove that love always conquers hate, and that defending our family is the only wealth that truly matters. If you believe that justice and family come before anything else, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that protecting those we love is the only war worth winning.